Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Eman Salim and you're watching Alum Time. Today we have with us a very special guest alum. He graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in 1983 and since then has had an extremely successful career path. With a unique leadership style and accolades in the corporate fashion and retail industry, he is now the executive chairman of Estee Lauder Companies, one of the largest and most successful companies in the world. So let's welcome Mr. William P. Lauder. Thank you so much, Mr. Lauder, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
So it's time for Alum Time. Estee Lauder is such a huge brand name, and Estee Lauder Companies houses over 30 makeup and fashion brands. I've heard you talk about the buy and not build strategy. Could you briefly explain, firstly, what that means, and then maybe how that has led to Estee Lauder Companies becoming what it is right now?
Well, when our company was founded in 1946 by my grandparents, they created the Estee Lauder brand. And then around 1960, my father created the Aramis brand. And in 1967, we created the Clinique brand. About 10 years later was Prescriptives. In 1990, we created Origins. And the experience we had in building brands was very, very rewarding, a great deal of work. And we recognized that there was a risk reward to build versus buy, and we started looking at the build versus buy options. Building a brand is higher risk, lower investment, maybe it works. Buying a brand is lower risk, higher cost. And we started looking both at our skill sets, creativity, originality, as well as the financial returns. And we determined that we need to be very flexible and looking at each situation as to whether or not we could build a brand versus buy a brand.
Just talking about all these brands and getting them into the fold of Estee Lauder Companies. So all these brands, no matter how small or big they are, they have their different, their distinct identity, their own culture. So when mergers and acquisitions happen, usually that's what, I've studied that usually 80% of them are not successful. How do you kind of maintain a unified culture in Estee Lauder Companies when you get all these different brands within the company?
Well, the merging of cultures as well as companies is it's an art form. There is not much science to it. It's really much more of an art form. And if you say you will be assimilated, resistance is futile, and you just absorb a company and wipe out its culture, you're probably pretty much wiping out the most important things you're trying to buy.
Absolutely.
At the same time, what you try to do is inject into the company those value systems of Estee Lauder that make the companies compatible, number one, but will help them become an even better company in the future. And how do we do that? We first start by saying we respect the culture, we respect everything you have about that they're there, that's great. Let's see what we can add to what you do to make it better. Usually the first steps are those things we do for the employees. Making sure that they are treated fairly and equally to all their other colleagues and all the other Estee Lauder companies around the world. That means putting them on all of our employment systems, all of our benefit programs, and treating them as equals. That's the first start. You're no different than anybody else. You're treated the same as everybody else, and you're treated just as well as everybody else. Secondly is to say, what elements of the DNA of your culture can we add to our company? So that it's not just, you become like us, and it's not like we become like you, we become more like each other.
So talking about all these different brands and incorporating them within Estee Lauder Companies, do you feel that there is a risk of brand cannibalization?
We don't necessarily look at cannibalization in a traditional academic sense. The original strategy as a multi-brand company competing amongst ourselves, a sibling rivalry in the prestige beauty space, this was a strategy created long before I ever became a part of the company. I don't think I was even in college yet. And the idea is that if a consumer is dissatisfied with an element of the brand for whatever reason and she wishes to try another brand, if we are offering a different brand that happens to have something that she finds attractive and she buys this product from this brand, we're okay if it's on one of our brands and not one of our competitors. And so we try to make sure that each of our brands is distinctive in its psychographics, demographics, pricing position, and unique propositions. And we try to make sure that as these brands are unique, if the consumer finds that she's going to try another product, the other product she tries, we hope would be one of ours. In addition to that, what's very important, only one of our brands has the name Estee Lauder on it. We've got many other brands that do not have the name Estee Lauder on it. And that's an important part of our strategy, to offer a multiplicity of brands, all to that aspirational consumer, all in a segment, but we would much rather cannibalize ourselves than let our competition cannibalize us.
So just shifting gears a little bit, talking about OCR, talking about that process, that stressful time of the year when Penn students are going crazy applying to places. This is a question that we got from a lot of Penn students. They wanted to know, and they wanted us to ask you what you feel are the most important qualities that Estee Lauder companies looks for when hiring people, and based on the kind of culture that you have.
You know, we look for many different, there's no one type of student we look for. First and foremost, we're looking for smart, hardworking, good people. That goes without saying. Beyond that, we want to look for people who we feel have a high likelihood of succeeding in our organization. We usually look for people, and we'll hopefully bring them in as summer interns, and we've got a number of different ways to become a summer intern with us. And our primary recruiting is in that. We also have relationships in a number of the best universities in the United States with professors who we rely on to say, that student, she's really excellent, you should see her. And then we have a value system also where we look at those people who we think have the highest likelihood of succeeding within our organization.
So what advice would you give to your college self when you were here at Penn, Warden? Anything that you would do differently if you think back to, at that time right now?
You know, I feel very fortunate that I was able to take advantage of so much of what the University of Pennsylvania had to offer. The thing that I found really fabulous, and if I look back and say, gee, I wish I'd done a lot more of this, were a couple things. First of all, there were and still are a lot of collaboratively taught classes taught by two professors from two different departments or two different parts of the university, integrating knowledge in a manner that the stimulation of that give and take between the professors and the pull and push of the different experiences, I thought was really interesting. I probably took about 4 or 5 classes that were team taught in one way, shape, or form. In retrospect, I would have even looked for more. Secondly, this, as any great university like Penn is, there are extraordinary resources that are available behind that marked door over there. And you just have to, and somebody's waiting for you to walk through it to show you what they have to offer you. And you have to really find ways to mine these tremendous nuggets that are so valuable. And oftentimes that really having open ears and listening to your friends who said, you know, I had a great experience with this professor. She was really fabulous and really stimulating. Wow, that class sounds great. Where do I find it? Well, you know, you go up to the 3rd floor, you go right, knock 3 times and tell them that so sent you, and there you are.
Yeah.
And I had many different discoveries as a result of that, and that wasn't something that was obvious from the traditional course catalog.
What advice would you give to current Penn students as they plan for their careers and lives in the real world? Most
important thing is take the time while you have this opportunity to get an education, That's not to gain a trade and to gain a skill, but it's to gain an education. For some, the gaining of that education may very well be acquiring technical skills to help them achieve the objectives that they already know they want in their lives. For others, it's gaining the education in the sense of follow your curiosity, follow those things that stimulate you, and those things will ultimately pay you back later in your life as you refer to this, oh yes, I remember this when I learned this. Or you can make those links and those references. It's very hard to believe when you're 20, 21 years old, and it's kind of scary. You're looking out into the great big world, getting a job, getting a career, moving on. And it's only after you've left an environment like this that you come to appreciate how special it really is to have this opportunity.
Absolutely, that's definitely gold advice, and I'm pretty sure that all the Penn students watching this are really going to pay attention to that. Okay, so today we have with us Ayo Fegbemi, Vice President Finance of the Penn Fashion Collective and a writer for the International Business Review. Thank you so much, Ayo, for joining us. Go right ahead.
Thank you for being here today. So what is your take on the fashion industry in general within the next 5 to 10 years? Are there any sort of trends or geographic areas that you're looking at in particular?
Well, you know, the fashion industry is always attracts a great deal of fascination around the world. A couple of the trends that we see developing over time, the very strong influence of the Chinese and Russian consumers over in fashion and luxury over the last 10 years, we see waning some. We continue to see a strength in the Middle Eastern consumer, and now we're seeing a consumer in sub-Saharan Africa begin to emerge. When I say where they're beginning to emerge, there's an emerging middle-class consumer who's beginning to have more disposable income, and then the more luxury-oriented consumers, especially from places like sub-Saharan Africa, they're beginning to travel outside their region. And they're beginning to look at fashion brands in Europe, in the United States, and other places, and their influence and desires is beginning to have an impact on what fashion designers are designing around the world. We continue to see more and more luxury consumers coming from Latin America, most particularly Brazil, and the influence of that Brazilian culture in fashion as well as in beauty is quite strong. And as always, you know, you continue to see the strength of the Indian subcontinent, and as those economies begin to emerge and the consumers and their desires, also those are having a great deal of influence both on fashion and beauty in particular. There are great waves of influence that go on because, for example, in the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent, makeup is very strong, and fragrance, skincare a little less so. In Asia, skincare is very dominant with some makeup, fragrance less so. In Europe, it's more fragrance oriented with makeup and some skincare. So the balances region by region around the world are all very different, and depending on in any given moment which group of consumers seems to be traveling more, shopping more, and their desires, you see different segments moving in balance. You know, it's sort of like an ecological balance almost.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ayo, for joining us. And thank you so much, Mr. Lauder, for being on the show. It was a pleasure having you. We would just request you to kindly sign our mug for us. If you could pass this.
Of course.
The markers.